Hi, in this video I wanted to go through the measuring ketones but in a slightly more detailed version than compared to the first video I have made. So the very first thing I tend to look for when someone is entering ketosis is tracking. So tracking is reasonably important, not always necessary unless there are very specific scenarios and conditions, yet it can give us a very good understanding on how the body is actually doing in relation to, in this case, ketosis. So I just wanted to go through three main things. The first one is why we measure ketones. What is the purpose of looking at ketosis and ketogenic application and measurements? The second part is measuring ketones, and the last part will be the type of measurement and the actual timing. The timing is also important, one, to understand how the metabolism works, but also can be quite important in looking at the financial investments that someone would have to use in relation to ketosis. So the question that I tend to ask when someone is dealing with ketosis or entering ketogenic diet and wants to start to track their ketosis is, first of all, we want to understand if we are in ketosis. And ketosis does not necessarily mean fat adaptation. In fact, many times when people say, oh, I am in ketosis, I try to understand if they are dipping in and out of ketosis and or they're fully fat adapted. These are two different things. So entering ketosis means that there are ketones in blood and we use some ketones for energy production system. Being fully fat adapted to me means that the body preferentially uses ketones and fats in order to manufacture energy on a daily basis. This is particularly important for long-term health, certain type of diseases or the application of dietary requirements in certain type of diseases, and also for sport performance. Now, also we want to look at disease states and therapeutics. So depending upon the disease, we may prefer a certain level of ketones rather than others. So for example, if we look at cancer, for example, if we look at epilepsy, data now and science is there. And it's really, really important to maintain certain levels. So in this case, blood level ketones are preferable in relation to, for example, breath ketones. On the other hand, if we're looking for a medium to low level of ketones, for example, in type 2 diabetes or long-term specific epigenetic control, or anti-inflammatory effects, optimization of electron transport chain. So all of these might not require the same levels that, for example, we have to maintain for epilepsy and cancer. So that can actually swing the way how we actually measure the ketones. So the last part is metabolic efficiency. We really want to optimize and actually support the body in this metabolic optimization in order to allow the body to burn fat very well to provide ATP, which is the currency of our energy. So I have created this chart in order to for people to have an understanding on why they would want to measure and kind of dictating the type of measurements they are going to do. So let me run through this chart. So this is the glucose ketones index, also known the GKI index, and this is also relevant to the insulin load estimate. So as we know, or as most people have observed, not all of us, we look at the ratio that there is between the millimolar measurements of glucose, as it would be in the UK, for example, and dividing this number by the millimolar measurement of ketones. So there is a little note on the right hand side that US, Australia and certain countries in Europe, they will have to convert the glucose from millimolar from milligram per deciliter into millimolar. They just need to take their figure and divide it by 18 and they would find a millimolar. So we know that if the millimolar glucose level divided by the ketones, if that ratio and if that number is over 9, the person is not likely to be in ketosis. They may have traces of ketosis, these are all blood measurements, yet not really looking at ketosis. This can happen in transition state or can happen if someone exits ketosis or someone on a normal glycolytic diet. Then we started to enter ketosis when this ratio is between 6 and 9. So once again, we take the ketone, the glucose measurement in millimolar, divided by the ketones, always in blood. And this will be, so if this ratio is between 6 and 9, the person is in ketosis. And on the right-hand side, the colored blue, green, and orange chart going from the bottom to the top. This is at the lower end of ketosis, and this could be potentially ideal for optimal health. So someone wants to use the kind of ketogenic pathway and ketogenic production system, but they don't really have any major needs to maintain very high level of ketosis. And this is fantastic, I find, for optimal health, weight control, weight management, and just general cognitive improvements. When we start to have this ratio between 3 and 6, this is ideal for good functional ketosis and tends to be ideal before exercise in general. This can also be extended to some mild to medium dysfunction. So, for example, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, or a little bit more aggressive weight management and weight control. Ideally, at this level would be great if the person is perhaps more stable in their ketosis. So generally speaking, people that are starting to become fat adapted, not just in ketosis, are in that zone. And this can play to our advantage or to the person's advantage, because this is when the body preferentially starts to use ketones over glucose. And the benefit of that, as I've gone through in a few presentations, and I will keep researching that specific area, we're starting to have a more substantial epigenetic control, fuel efficiency, how the body cognitively would function much better. So all of these benefits that can be already observed at that level. Now, for therapeutic high or therapeutic level of ketosis, this is where we look at 1 to 3 ratios. So we take the millimolar of glucose and divide it by the ketones. If the ratio is 1, as many researchers has set as their aim to be in ketosis for their patients or clients, this is where we look perhaps at more aggressive control of ketosis, and these could be applied to epilepsy, cancer, and so on. So this is just to give you an idea on how I tend to consider the blood measurement of ketones and the potential usage of the keto or the ketosis in order to support whatever is our aim and our goal. Now, first of all, I just wanted to mention also something in relation to carbohydrate. Most people think that the more fat they eat, the more ketotic they'll become. Well, yes and no. I have found that one of the best ways to actually raise the blood ketone level is actually fasting. Fasting, by fasting I mean fasting, not fat coffee fasting, not kind of time restricted feeding. That's a different type of fasting. To me, fasting is fasting, so the person is on water only, no with juices or yeah, this is when the body can become very, very confused. So either fasting or time-restricted feeding. We may not get the whole benefit of fasting, yet we are starting to, in a way, force the body to actually use the reservoir in order to manufacture ketones. And that has been found to be really, really, really efficient in order to help the person in entering ketosis. I have also created this carbohydrate tolerance chart in order to give you an idea on when I have observed the ketones starting to raise quite substantially. So as you can see from this chart, this is in milligrams per deciliter, and the carbohydrate intake in grams per day. Ideally, we want to look at the 60 to 100 milligrams per deciliter, which will equate to around 4 all the way to 5.5. I have found that any times I measure the glucose and is above 5, it's very unlikely we're going to find any decent level of ketones in blood, that is. So normally when the blood glucose drops below 5 and is still nice and stable, so not actually entering hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia, then we can start to see good level of ketones. So for example, people on 3.8, 3.9, 4, 4.5, this seems to be a range in which ketones are actually expressed and found in blood very, very, very well. Now, this is a summary on what are the instruments that are available in order to actually measure the ketones, and that will actually give us the when, because depending upon the type of measurement, we can select appropriate times, and we can be quite specific in this time to understand better where we are in relation to ketosis. So the first method is urine testing. Now, anything above 15, we started to enter ketosis. The measurements of urine, obviously urine is a collection period that our bladder would have, so we can't understand very well what is the body doing at that specific moment in time. So it's more of an overview. And what I have found, and this is quite remarkably precise across different individuals, is a great and very inexpensive method to understand if the person is manufacturing ketones, but only in the adaptation period. When the individual becomes more fully fat adapted, actually the level of ketones that the body gets rid of in urines, which is totally logical and understandable, is quite intuitive, tends to be very low. So it tends to have very low level of acetoacetate, which is the one that is excreted in urines, in order to try to maintain either in blood or use the ketones in order to favor energy production system. Then we have the blood testing. Normally we aim a starting point of 0.6 to 1 in the morning. That seems to be actually a pretty good level, and that is a snapshot. So that is what is in the blood circulating at that moment in time. In England can be the Libre, can be the Freestyle, Neo. There are different ones. In the US could be the Precision Extra. There are different kits that you can use. Now, one of the things that I look for blood testing is the timing. So I generally tend to prefer to measure late morning, definitely having had 2 to 3 hours after food. So if someone is having breakfast or a fatty coffee if they prefer, so maybe look at mid-morning towards lunchtime. This will allow the body to have a good level of ketones, because allows the body to have the time to actually manufacture the ketones. And this is when I would suggest as far as the first part of the day. We can also do the same thing in the afternoon. and or before retiring. Needless to say, if someone is dealing with a specific disease and they have to maintain a reasonably good high level of ketones, in that case, obviously the frequency has to be perhaps revisited with a much higher frequency. I tend to, unless there is a very specific need like the one I just mentioned, I probably would look to have not the measurement first thing in the morning. Normally are low. This seems to be across the board. I'm sure that there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, even 1 millimolar first thing in the morning is actually quite good. The third type of measurement is breath, and the breath ketones to me represent more the ones that have been exhausted. So these are the ones that we have used for energy from the actual blood. And I've gone through a lecture in the different type of pathways that tend to manufacture ketones, going from basically fatty acid into the actual 3 types of ketones. Now, the breath testing, I tend to use a kit called Ketonics, and really I'm looking anything above 45 in the scale that actual Ketonic actually uses. So the breath test, I've tried so many times to compare it to blood, and the correlation has very strong fluctuation. And this is actually what prompted me to try to understand why this correlation actually would change. And that's the reason why I now think that the blood ketones is a snapshot at that moment in time of what are the reservoirs in blood of the ketones. So these are the ketones that the body has manufactured ready to be used for our function, our energy production system. Whereas the breath gives us in a way the efficiency by which the body has burned the actual ketones. So basically looking at a conversion between beta hydroxybutyrate in the blood into acetone that can be detected, the first one in blood through test kit on a finger prick, and a little tiny sample of blood, whereas the other one through the breath test and the breathalyzer. This is quite important because some people only rely on the breath test because you make one purchase and then that's it. You can use it ongoingly and it tends to last for quite a few years. Whereas the strips seems to be quite expensive compared to normal blood glucose strips. So I tend to measure still both at the same time. However, you can also measure the breath first thing in the morning. And that tends to give you an understanding on how well the body has maintained the burning of ketones for energy production system all throughout the night. Now, we mentioned earlier that the body doesn't seem to accumulate ketones in high amount and in high levels during the night. So therefore, the reading of blood ketones in the morning is reasonably low. However, the actual breath ketones, these are generally speaking quite high. So given a quite substantial reduction in the need for energy during the night and during sleep, then obviously the body keeps burning ketones, hence we have a breath reading that is reasonably medium to high, whereas unless we are out of ketosis, that is, whereas the blood is actually quite low. As the body perceives upon waking, and different hormones and different neurotransmitters will play a substantial role in this, including dietary intake, then we are starting to see an increase of the blood ketones as well. So I have created this little chart to help you in navigate the correlation that there are. So if beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the blood, is low, and acetone, which is the breath, is low, definitely the person is not in full ketosis. Or there are some potential metabolic impairments or hiccups for which the body is actually not able to enter ketosis very well. One could be, for example, high insulin response or prolonged insulin response. Can be, for example, some SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphism, or perhaps some enzymatic deficiency. And these have to be definitely monitored by a health professional. In other cases, it could just be a question of re-evaluating the substrate proportion. Perhaps the person has not found a good carbohydrate tolerance level. We mentioned also insulin and also cofactor. So if someone has a substantial carnitine deficiency, especially from vegetarian diets or certain vegetarian diets, then we find that the person really struggle to enter ketosis. So in that case, either through readjusting the level of substrate and the proportion of the substrate, or the levels, I mean the quantity of the substrate, and or ascertaining that there are no any major metabolic impairment by which the person is not able to reach ketosis, this can be easily adjusted. The second case is when the blood level of ketones is high and acetone, the breath, is actually low. That to me seems that the conversion is quite poor, meaning there are some limitations that affect the conversion from beta-hydroxybutyrate into energy production system and actually burn the ketones. So I have found this being the factor one in cofactors, as above, insulin that has taken the person the period prior the measuring slightly out of ketosis, or even if in ketosis, has reduced the level by which the body can burn sufficiently well the ketones, and definitely to consider single nucleotide polymorphism and mitochondrial damage. These are obviously, these will require a little bit more attention, because when the blood beta-hydroxybutyrate is high, and for example at the same time we have high glucose, which is the typical scenario of a type 1 diabetic, this is when perhaps is a little bit more dangerous in order to for the person to reach ketoacidosis, and this is definitely something that will require medical supervision or someone that is trained in using ketogenic diet. The last part is probably the easiest case scenario, when BHBA, so beta-hydroxybutyrate in blood, is low and acetone is high. This tends to be down to simple reserves that have been burnt. So maybe looking at re-evaluating the substrate intake, maybe the person has had a little bit too many carbs, or not enough fat, or the body struggles to access the fat, well, I call them the dietary stored fat, because our fat still has to be taken in consideration. So this is when we re-evaluate again the food proportions and the food substrate quantity. Now, I wanted to put this in a kind of visual chart, and I wanted to create something really easy and simple rather than lots of text. And this is what I have come up with. So as you can see here, you have on the acetone breath, and these are the ones that are burned. This is basically the correlation between ketones on blood and acetone interaction. So we have here in the far bottom left the start of ketosis. So we take 0.5 as really the main starting point, although it's still very, very low. And then we look at acetone, which is the breath one, which is the one that is actually burned. And if it's very high here on your left hand side, but very, very close to the left hand side axis, we know that the reserves are low and there is a very high conversion. So this is when perhaps we want to look at increasing the fat, the dietary fat, reducing the impact of insulin. One of my colleagues called Marty Kendall did a lot of research in relation to insulin load, optimizing nutrition. If you search optimizing nutrition, he has done some absolutely fantastic work in looking at the insulin level. Whereas on the other hand, if we have very low ketones in the breath, measured in the breath, but very high blood, this is when there is a low conversion and high reserve. And this is the one that definitely I would want to pay a lot more attention, because it could potentially be a little bit more concerning for people, being aware that can potentially reach ketoacidosis. So I hope this video helped and give you an understanding, a little bit deeper understanding on when to use measurements of ketones, trying to save you as much economical resources and time resources as I possibly can, yet wanting to be reasonably safe and understanding all these correlations that there are in measuring ketones. Have a great day.